You could just name one person, and I'll let you cheat and possibly name more than one. But who is the ultimate villain against Bitcoin? After all this conversation, we talked the ESG side of it, we talked the political side, we talked the idiot shitcoiners. Who, in your opinion, is truly the Thanos to Bitcoin's Avengers?
Well, I'm going to be going to this conference in a few days with him, but I got to say it's Alex DeVries. I do, because it's like the origin story of the FUD traces back to him. So he's not, when I look at what he's done, it is so impressive. He's somebody who, he had a hobby website called Doge Economist. He started thinking about the carbon footprint of Bitcoin. He came up with these kind of bullshit metrics, publishing it. He wrote a couple papers. He had a master's degree in economics. He went to work for a central bank. The next thing I know, okay, his article influences Camilla Mora to write this piece that gets published in Nature Climate Change. They cite Alex DeVries. Everybody cites Alex DeVries. He's the source in every paper on Bitcoin's emissions. He stepped into that space. And he's just repeatedly dishonest, fundamentally dishonest about how he presents data. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I'm an academic. I presume that people are honest. I presume that when I show them inconsistencies, they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry about that. I'll fix it. But that was not his response. It was just like double down at every stage. So he's responsible for the infamous energy per transaction stat, emissions per transaction stat. He keeps talking about the cost of a transaction in Bitcoin and dividing the total energy use of Bitcoin by the number of transactions. And that stat has appeared everywhere.
And it makes zero sense. Yeah.
It makes zero sense at all, for 1,000 reasons. I can take it apart, but it lodged in the popular imagination. 2 months of household energy use for one transaction in Bitcoin. Well, that's horrible. Who wants to do that? I mean, who's like, your entire electric bill or 3 months or whatever Elizabeth Warren is saying now, it's always varying, and it's ridiculous because of course you pay like $1 at most for a transaction right now. And how can you buy 2 months worth of power with $1? How is this even happening? And that's because, that's not transaction fees. That's the block reward. And we have layer twos that are taking our volume. And so when it comes to layer twos, for instance, here's a part of dishonesty of Alex DeVries. The Lightning Network. He mentions it. He mentions it in some of his papers. He says, oh, there aren't really Bitcoin transactions, so I won't include them in the stat. Also, we don't really know how many of them are happening. And then he's like, but what we should include is the additional power that those Lightning nodes are consuming.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Right? So he wants to add that on top. So you can see what I mean? It's like this throughout everything he writes.
Yeah.
I mean, here's another example of dishonesty. So he writes this paper. Again, he does the dividing by transaction. He writes this paper on e-waste in Bitcoin, and he argues that we are filling landfills with e-waste. He argues that a single Bitcoin transaction is equivalent to 2 iPhones worth of e-waste for every single transaction in Bitcoin. Right? He estimates the life of a miner to be like 1.29 years, something like that, 1.3 years. And there are S9s. They're still 5% of the network, even with the latest stuff coming out. And at the time he wrote it, they were 20% of the network. Yeah. And S9s were at that point, 5.5 years old. Supposedly, we've been through like 3 life cycles of miners, and you still have to pay really good money to get one of these S9s.
Yep.
It's just totally inexcusable. And he's got this very, very fancy mathematical model for determining the lifespan of miners. He could have just checked eBay. Another thing he could have just checked is the filings, SEC filings of miners themselves, because they have to write down their depreciation for miners. And if their miners were going out of profitability in 1.3 years, they would have said that, right? Because that erases some income for them. And then the truth is, I think even when, like with the S9s, even when their profitability goes negative, which they're getting there, we're getting close, they're going to slot into this awesome role that he refuses to acknowledge of absorbing excess energy. Your S9 doesn't have to be profitable. Rather than throwing it into a landfill, you just keep it there. And when you put it behind meter at a wind farm, and when prices go negative, you turn it on. And you turn it off when prices go back positive again, right? Or you use it for waste heat. or you just wait for the Bitcoin price to explode again because it's basically an option on future Bitcoin. So there's the idea that they're ending up in landfills on the basis of this bullshit model. And then it was every major newspaper around the freaking world. It was Time Magazine, it was Newsweek, it was the magazines, it was The Guardian. 2 iPhones binned per transaction, e-waste, blah, blah, blah. And then it appears in the letter from 70 environmental organizations to Congress. Then it appears in Senator Elizabeth Warren's literature. Then it appears in Jared Hoffman's letter to the EPA. It's just like it spreads like wildfire because it started in a peer-reviewed journal. Right? So how is this guy not the supervillain? It's the ultimate source of misinformation, which then, the idea that, the idea that Bitcoin bros are filling landfills with e-waste. At one point, people measured the e-waste in grand pianos. I mean, there was different like creative ways to measure it. And when when the actual percentage of e-waste due to Bitcoin is like, it's less than 1/10,000th of e-waste, less than 1/10,000th. It's basically nothing because almost every ASIC that's ever been designed, it still makes sense to hold. So it's basically, it's hard to even estimate how much it is, but because it's so low. But anyway, that's DeVries, and he's on a campaign, and now his buddies also have an ESG style way of measuring. They have a firm that measures, the environmental footprint of various cryptocurrencies per transaction and overall. And he is pushing that business on the European Union and on businesses in Europe who want to invest in ESG conscious ways. So he's the person inventing these bullshit metrics that will be taken up by governments, banks, and investment firms. He's the one who's hand feeding it to them.